He was 18 when the world tried to turn him into someone else. A Scottish kid with an acoustic guitar walked onto television, sang "Catch the Wind," and suddenly Britain wanted a new Bob Dylan. But the label never fit. The first single reached number 4 in the United Kingdom. Before the year was over, he was standing near the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Pete Seeger. Then came the turn nobody expected. Sunshine Superman went to number 1 in America, but back home, legal trouble delayed the record that should have made him untouchable. A marijuana arrest turned him into a newspaper target. A flower power image made him easy to dismiss. And somewhere inside all of that, one of the strangest, most original songwriters of the 60s started disappearing behind his own myth. The chart numbers are real. The arrest was real. The sessions with Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones were real. So was the trip to India with the Beatles, where pop music, meditation, and fame all collided under one hot spiritual sun. But the real question is not whether he mattered. The real question is why a man who helped shape psychedelic folk, influenced giants, and earned the respect of rock history still had to spend decades proving he was more than a pretty hippie with flowers in his hair. This is the real story of Donovan. And by the end, the soft voice may not sound soft at all. Chapter 1. The Boy They Mistook for Another. Dylan Donovan Phillips Leach was born in Glasgow, Scotland, on May 10, 1946. But the story that made him famous did not start with a polished music school path. It started with movement. When he was still a child, his family moved south to Hatfield, Hertfordshire, and by his teens, Donovan was already reaching for another life, one song at a time. The guitar became his passport. He studied folk and blues songs, absorbed influence from players like Bert Jansch, Davy Graham, Martin Carthy, Alex Campbell, and Daryl Adams, and drifted into the folk world with the hunger of someone who did not want a plain, ordinary future. He busked, he traveled. Through St. Albans, Cornwall, and the bohemian circles of young men with guitars, Donovan found a place where a song could make a nobody feel visible. That was the spark. Not one clean tragedy, not some neat childhood wound you could explain in a single line. It was restlessness, and he could not put it down. By 1964, Ralph Peer Jr. had noticed Donovan, and the machinery around him began to move. A demo opportunity in London turned into management, publishing, and television exposure. Soon he was appearing on Ready, Steady, Go, the kind of show that could make a face famous before the person behind it understood what fame was about to do. Then came Catch the Wind, released by Pi Records in March 1965.
But I may as well try and catch the wind.
It sounded gentle, open, and young. Donovan was only 18, and suddenly that became part of the story. Britain heard the soft voice, the acoustic guitar, the poetic ache, and decided it already understood him. The single reached number 4 in the United Kingdom. That should have felt like pure victory, but the first trap was already closing. The press called him the British Bob Dylan, as if one young folk singer could only be explained by measuring him against another. The comparison was easy. It was lazy. And for Donovan, it became almost impossible to outrun. He had arrived, but he had arrived wearing someone else's shadow. That shadow would follow him long after his music had already changed. Chapter 2. Fame came too fast, and the label would not come off. The strange thing about Donovan's early fame is that it was never small. It only feels small later because the myth around him became so light and flowery that people forgot how quickly he hit. In 1965, Catch the Wind was not some private little folk success.
I may as well try and catch the wind.
It was a real chart record, and it made Donovan one of the most visible young singers in Britain. Then Colours followed it into the same territory, also reaching number 4 in the United Kingdom. One hit can be luck. 2 hits start to look like a rival. The albums came just as quickly. What's Been Did and What's Been Hid entered the United Kingdom album chart in June 1965.
The long breezes are blowing out down the sky.
Reached number 3 and proved Donovan was not just a television face with one pretty single. Later that year, Fairy Tale reached the album chart too, giving the public another version of him.
Blue's the color of the sky in the morning.
Before the first version had even settled. But fame has a cruel habit. It does not wait for an artist to explain himself. By the middle of that same year, Donovan was already standing near giants. He appeared at the Newport Folk Festival, helped there by Pete Seeger's support. He also appeared at Wembley's Empire Pool on a bill with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and other major names. Think about that for a second. A teenager who had recently been busking and chasing songs around Britain was now moving in the same orbit as the biggest acts on Earth. That sounds like a dream. It was also dangerous. The faster Donovan rose, the less room he had to define himself. The public had been handed a simple version: young folk singer, acoustic guitar, poetic words, new Dylan. It did not matter that his influences were wider. It did not matter that British folk, blues, and road songs had shaped him in ways the comparison missed. It did not matter that he was already preparing to become something brighter, stranger, and harder to classify. The label stuck because it was convenient. Once a label sticks, every new song has to fight through it. So Donovan kept winning, but the victory carried a quiet insult inside it. He was not being ignored, he was being simplified. That can be worse. An ignored artist can still surprise people. A simplified artist has to escape the version of himself everyone thinks they already know. By the end of 1965, Donovan had hits, television exposure, major festival appearances, and album success. What he did not have was control over the story. Chapter 3: Sunshine, Psychedelia, and the Legal Mess at Home. The escape started with Color. Not just Colors the song, but Color as a whole new way of hearing Donovan. The plain folk image was about to crack open, and what came out was much stranger than the early press had prepared anyone for. With producer Mickie Most and arranger John Cameron, Donovan began making records that did not sit neatly inside folk music at all. This was where the old Dylan comparison started to collapse. The sound widened, folk met jazz, blues brushed against classical touches, Indian colors slipped into British pop, psychedelia arrived, but not as noise or chaos. Donovan made it float. He used acoustic guitar, electric guitar, sitar, harpsichord, flute, horns, strings, tablas, and hand drums as if the studio had become a painted room with no fixed walls. Then came Sunshine Superman. In 1966, the record became Donovan's great American breakthrough. It reached #1 in America, and for a moment, it looked as if the boy everyone had compared to someone else had forced the world to hear him on his own terms. This was not imitation. This was Donovan stepping into psychedelic pop before the decade had fully caught up with him. But the triumph carried a bitter joke. Back in the United Kingdom, contractual red tape delayed the release. At the exact moment Sunshine Superman should have made him untouchable at home, the record was trapped in business trouble. The song was flying in America while its maker was being held back in the country that had first claimed him. That was Donovan's career in miniature. The music moved forward. The machinery pulled him sideways. Then the newspapers got their weapon. In 1966, Donovan was arrested for marijuana possession. Years later, he said police found 2 ounces, and he described himself as the first British pop singer arrested for marijuana. That detail matters because it shows how quickly the story around him changed. 1 year earlier, he was the sensitive young folk singer with a soft voice. Now he was a public symbol inside a larger panic about youth, drugs, and pop culture. The arrest did not erase the music, but it changed the lighting around it. Every flower, every mystical phrase, every dreamy melody could now be treated as evidence of something suspicious. Donovan's image became useful to people who wanted to mock the 60s and useful to people who wanted to fear it. Meanwhile, the work kept moving. Mellow Yellow reached #2 in America and #8 in the United Kingdom.
They call me Mellow Yellow, oh yeah.
The record was playful, strange, and unforgettable, but it also fed the caricature. To casual listeners, Donovan became the sunny psychedelic boy, the soft center of flower power, the one with the odd phrases and the gentle smile. That image was not completely false. It was worse than false. It was incomplete. Underneath the brightness was an artist trying to break out of every box people built for him. He had escaped the Dylan shadow, only to find another costume waiting. This time it had flowers on it. This time it looked harmless, but it still hid the man inside. Chapter 4: the flower power image that hid the real musician. The problem with a gentle image is that people mistake it for a small one. By the late 60s, Donovan had become easy to picture. The soft voice, the dreamy face, the flower in the hand. The songs that sounded as if they had drifted in from some sunlit field. For one kind of listener, that became the whole man, a pleasant relic of incense, beads, and soft colors. But listen closer, and the records tell a different story. Mellow Yellow may have sounded playful, but it was not ordinary pop. There is a mountain carried a strange circular charm, the kind of phrase that seemed simple until it stayed in your head for days. Jennifer Juniper gave Donovan another major United Kingdom hit, reaching number 5.
Come on, first there is a mountain, then there is no yes, very love, what you doing, Jenny?
And made his romantic, pastoral side feel almost effortless. Effortless can be dangerous too. When something sounds easy, people forget how much craft sits underneath it. That is why A Gift from a Flower to a Garden matters. It was not just another album release. It came in a box, with a folder of poems, and the format itself told you Donovan was trying to make something more like a private world you could hold in your hands. The cover showed him with a flower in a field. The back showed him sitting cross-legged with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. To some people, that image confirmed every joke. To Donovan, it was part of the search. The music underneath kept stretching. The arrangements used sitar, harpsichord, flute, horns, strings, tablas, hand drums, electric guitar, and acoustic guitar. That was not the sound of a man lazily floating on a trend. It was the sound of someone treating pop music like a room where anything could be brought inside. Then came Hurdy-Gurdy Man. Anyone who still thought Donovan was only soft had a harder argument after that record.
When the Hurdy-Gurdy Man came singing song.
It reached number 4 in the United Kingdom and number 5 in America. But the chart position is not the most startling part. The startling part is the sound. Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones played on the track, and Rhino later described its blend of acoustic folk and electric force as something that pointed toward what Led Zeppelin would soon make massive. Think about that. The singer people remember as a flower power troubadour had future hard rock thunder rumbling through one of his records. That does not mean Donovan secretly became a heavy rock act. That would be too simple, and Donovan's story is already full of people making him too simple. The sharper point is that his music sat at a crossing point. Folk was there, psychedelia was there, Indian sound was there, popcraft was there, session players who would help shape heavier music were there too, and still, the public image kept shrinking him. The flower got remembered, the experiments got blurred. That is how an artist can be famous and underestimated at the same time. Chapter 5: India, the Beatles, and the Cost of Becoming a Symbol. By 1968, Donovan was no longer just a young singer with a guitar. He had become part of a wider 60s story, and that story was getting bigger than any one musician could control. The scene almost sounds invented, but it was real. Donovan traveled to India with the Beatles and others to study with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Pop stars who had already conquered the charts were now sitting inside a spiritual search, trying to find something fame had not given them. For Donovan, it fit the path he had already been walking. He had moved from folk songs to psychedelic sound, from the road to meditation, from youthful restlessness to a more public search for meaning. But the world does not always reward growth. Sometimes it freezes the image right when you are trying to move. That is the trap Donovan stepped into. The trip to India deepened the mystical side of his reputation, and his connection to the Beatles only made the image brighter. His official biography later claimed George Harrison said Donovan was all over the White Album, and whether the public understood the details or not, the larger idea stuck. Donovan was there, near the center of that moment when rock stars, Eastern thought, acoustic guitars, and restless fame all met under one roof. For legacy, that connection helped him. For identity, it complicated everything. Now Donovan was not only fighting the old Bob Dylan comparison, he was also becoming a symbol of the psychedelic spiritual 60s, the smiling poet beside the bigger legends. Even when he tried to change the message, people heard the costume first. That is what makes a gift from a flower to a garden so revealing. Donovan used it to urge young people away from drugs and toward the sun. That is a very different story from the lazy caricature of the druggy flower child. He was not simply selling escape. In his own way, he was pointing people toward another kind of clarity. But symbols are stubborn. Once the public has a picture of you, it tends to keep it. The more Donovan leaned into flowers, meditation, poems, and spiritual language, the more he seemed to confirm the easiest version of himself. The irony is almost cruel. The very things he used to grow beyond drug culture helped lock him inside the popular memory of psychedelic culture. And while that was happening, the songs kept traveling. Season of the Witch found new life through Al Kooper and Stephen Stills. Fat Angel was covered by Jefferson Airplane. There Is a Mountain gave the Allman Brothers Band a foundation for Mountain Jam.
First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain.
Other musicians heard the bones inside Donovan's writing, even when casual listeners remembered only the surface. That is the split in his story. Musicians knew there was more there. The public often settled for the postcard. And once an artist becomes a postcard, the living person has to fight to be seen again. Chapter 6. The Long Afterlife of a Misunderstood 60s Star. The 60s ended, but Donovan did not. That sounds obvious, but it matters because pop history can be brutal with anyone tied too tightly to one era. Once the calendar turns, the culture starts sorting people into boxes. Some get called timeless. Some get called dated. Donovan was tied to one of the most visually powerful moments in modern music, so the image followed him even after the decade was gone. In the 70s, he kept working. Open Road became his first album of the decade. And he described its direction as acoustic Celtic rock. That phrase matters because it shows he was still reaching for roots and reinvention, not just trying to repeat Sunshine Superman or Mellow Yellow until the magic wore out. Later came records like Cosmic Wheels and 7 Ts. Proof that the career continued even when the cultural spotlight moved elsewhere. But once a star slips out of the center, people rewrite the past. The hits become the whole story. The image becomes the man. The stranger edges get sanded down until all that remains is the easy version. For Donovan, that meant years of being remembered as a soft psychedelic figure, while the deeper story sat in plain sight. The chart records, the studio risks, the influence, the covers, the players, the spiritual turn, the songwriting. He did not disappear, he was reduced. That is a different kind of loss. In 1996, Sutras brought him together with producer Rick Rubin, a man known for helping older artists stand in new light without stripping away their past. In 2004, Donovan released Beat Cafe, another reminder that he was not only a museum piece from the summer of love.
As the reefer blow, go, chick, go.
He was still writing, still recording, still carrying the old voice into later rooms. History eventually caught up, but it took its time. In 2012, Donovan was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, with John Mellencamp listed as his inductor. 2 years later, in 2014, he entered the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Those honors matter because they answered the old insult. They placed him where the Dylan comparisons, the flower jokes, and the hippie shorthand could not completely erase him. Recognition arriving late always carries a sting. By then, the simplified version had already traveled farther than the complicated truth. Donovan had helped shape psychedelic folk. He had pushed pop arrangements into stranger colors. He had records touched by musicians who would become central to rock history. His songs had moved through Jefferson Airplane, Al Kooper, Stephen Stills, and the Allman Brothers Band. The evidence had been there for decades. People just had to listen past the flowers. That is where Donovan's body story lands. Not in ruin, and not in total victory. It lands in a more human place. He survived the labels. He outlived the jokes. He received the honors. Yet the old misunderstanding never fully vanished. The soft voice was real. So was the steel underneath it. So maybe the mistake was never that people remembered Donovan. The mistake was what they remembered first. They remembered the flowers, the soft voice, the sunny colors, and the easy jokes. They remembered the 60s costume before they remembered the writer inside it. But beneath that image was a restless Scottish kid who turned folk music into something stranger, brighter, and harder to dismiss. He stood near giants, influenced giants, and then spent years being treated like a decoration from their era. That is the strange ache in his story. He was not forgotten, he was simplified, and once you hear the records without the old labels, Donovan stops sounding like a relic. He starts sounding like a warning. Never confuse gentleness with weakness.